Show's about to get started. So buckle up because I'm sure you're going to enjoy what we do. We got O Man in the chat. Welcome aboard. There may be a special guest tonight. I'm still not sure, but we'll give that a minute. If they pop up, great. And if not, no worries because I wasn't planning on building a show around the interview. Welcome to the show. I'm Gene, last good man in Jersey, and we are going to be talking about the Philippines today. Now, there's a lot that's been going on of late with the Philippines, and if people come trickling in a bit, then we'll bring them up to speed. In short, what you see when you listen to what's going on in YouTube is that the Passport Bro movement is small, but it's growing. And it's very encouraging as I've been spending time in this space to see more people starting to ask questions about the Philippines, specific questions, not just, the generic stuff that you hear about getting your passport, but now we've got people who are starting to talk about places to go in the Philippines, things to do. They want to understand costs. There are guys who are starting to actually plan their trips. And that's what I like to see. And if I can help people better understand what to expect, how to make the most out of their trip, then that's basically what I really want to do. I stand very strongly behind statements I've made and a lot of the content that you'll see from me. You go to the Philippines and you're going to be blown away. And I have yet to hear anybody go to the Philippines and come back with a different story unless they were just going there looking to smash and dash and they went to the wrong place. There are places in the Philippines you can go if that's what you're looking for. There are places where you shouldn't go if that's what you're looking for. However, if what you're looking for is relationships, yeah, you're going to find them and you will not believe the caliber of people you will meet, the kinds of relationships you'll find, or the quality of life that you can experience when you're there. We're going to be talking about that. But before we get in, let's sort of touch base on an idea. If you're hearing you talking about the Philippines, and basically you've got one of two things that's going on, because people basically travel for one of two reasons. People are traveling either because they're looking for experiences, or they're traveling because they're looking for resources. Now, when I say people are traveling for experiences, that's things like you wanting to go and see the Mona Lisa, go check out the Sphinx. You want to go whale shark diving, which is what my background is. Those things are pretty easy to do. You know where the location is, you book your trip, you pretty much check the box. Resources, however, is a little bit different. And that's the piece that the Philippines is really offering. So when I'm talking about resources, what I'm talking about are things like someplace where you can find lower cost retirement because you don't want to watch your money just get eaten up in taxes in the States in your golden years. Place where you can find happier communities to bury yourself in because you're tired of the rat race. But let's face it, America is built on capitalism. So it's very hard to travel anywhere in the States and not be inundated with people who are basically busy trying to build their financial empires. That's our culture. Another resource, and this is an important resource, and we're going to be spending time talking about this one. If you are looking for a wife, you may be the kind of person who says, I need to travel. It's not to say that there aren't women in the States. It's not to say that there aren't women in the States who want to be married. But it is to say that when you're thinking about the kind of woman who you want and how easy or difficult it is to find her, you can start to be really rubbed the wrong way when you start looking at the economics of it. What you'll hear a lot of people say is that the juice ain't worth the squeeze. And for the most part, that's true. Again, doesn't mean there aren't good women in the States. What we're talking about is how easy or difficult it is to find them. And frankly, it's not easy to find good women in the States. It's not to say they aren't there, but let's face it. When I go to my gym, I'm plugged in. The other people there are plugged in. Not a place to talk. I work from home. And even if I am at work, I'm darn sure not going to approach some woman at work. Too much risk. You don't approach women when you're walking down the street. If you're going to bars, you're probably not talking to the women there. You're just watching the game. We've lost kind of that casual interaction that we used to have that allowed for you to meet people. What are you doing now to try to meet people? Well, you're probably online. But online is a mess. It's all swipes, a little bit of time spent looking at a profile. Basically, no one really taking the time to get to know anyone because let's face it, you got 100 people you can like, and you're not going to spend too much time thinking about any individual since the next swipe looks like it could always be better. That's one of the challenges with things that we're dealing with here. And a lot of guys who want to get married are saying, I need to go someplace else. I posted a video just this week about a guy in Houston, traveled to Cebu, found himself a wife, and I believe that now they're married. He and I are working through some timing for potentially doing an interview because I want to hear that guy's story of what led him specifically to Cebu, how they met, how that whole thing has worked out. There's definitely some benefits and there are going to be some risks that you have to think about in a situation like that. But that's a step in the right direction. That's a man who's resourceful. That's a man who, looking at his social media pages, is successful. And that's a man who found a wife. I don't think he's up and decided he needed to go to the Philippines to find a wife. I'm guessing he was probably doing a lot of work here and realized I'm not seeing what I'm looking for. And I want exactly what I'm looking for, so I'm going to go to the Philippines to find it. I've been to the Philippines, and I'm going to give you the story on my experience. I'm going to talk to you about what I had. I'll answer questions you have. But what I want you to walk away from this show with is an understanding of what you should expect if you're planning a trip to the Philippines. Because if you got the right expectations, it's going to blow you away. Now, getting into why I went to the Philippines, I'd been hearing about it. We're going to say going back a little bit over a year ago, I really started hearing a lot of conversations about, this thing called the passport bros. And at that time, I didn't know what it was. There were women who were angry at the passport bros. They were criticizing the places that these guys were going. And that was really my introduction to the passport bros, was women who were complaining about it. I started listening to the stories. And here's the thing for me that didn't make a lot of sense. Women were complaining about the quality of women that these passport bros were finding in Southeast Asia. Now, I've been to Indonesia. So I'd already been to Southeast Asia before I'd ever heard of passport bros or ever heard of any of the arguments that people were making for traveling or against it. And I got to tell you, what these women were saying didn't make any sense to me. The people in Indonesia were pleasant. It was Indonesia, and the part of Indonesia I was in was a poorer part of Indonesia, but it wasn't a third world country. It wasn't even close. People had jobs. People had lives and families. They didn't make as much as Americans do, but let's face it, very few people in the world make as much as we do. We're one of the richest countries there is. So You have to kind of put some perspective around that. But one thing I did notice in Indonesia, and I was becoming more curious about, was that relationships were a lot easier there than they were in the West. I went to Indonesia to visit my family. My sister was there with her husband. They had a house. They were inviting me over to couch surf and experience it, and I wanted to. Women in Indonesia, locals, were very comfortable just chatting you up. Women who I would categorize as eights, nines, and tens were shooting their shot at me. And that wasn't something I was used to. I've dated women in the States, and I would say that probably 95% of the time, I'm the one who's initiating. I'm making contact, I'm pursuing, I'm putting in all the effort, and I'm trying to build. Having some young, beautiful woman, exotic, slim, long hair, looking at me and trying to figure out if I'm interested in her, that was a little bit of a culture shock. I had never really experienced that before. Now, I was only there for a week. I didn't really have time to get into building a relationship, and that's kind of what these women were looking for. So I didn't think too much about it at the time. But now I was listening to these stories about passport bros. And they were talking about traveling, mainly the ones I was listening to the Philippines or to Thailand. And these guys were talking about looking for wives. These guys were talking about looking for serious relationships. These guys were saying things that made sense to me about wanting women who probably didn't understand the concept of divorce, about women who wanted to have your kids, wanted to be homemakers, wanted to build with their husbands who they respected. They were talking about women who actually acted like they liked the men they were dating. And that was something that kind of struck me as odd because I thought, I don't know if it is feminism or not, but there's a war between the genders that seems to be raging in the States. And men aren't happy with women, women aren't happy with men. And somehow we're supposed to date each other, but when it feels like nobody can really stand the other side, you start to wonder how that's supposed to work. That didn't exist in Indonesia at all. And when I'm hearing people talk about Philippines and Thailand and saying that that doesn't exist there, that made sense to me. That made perfect sense to me, but I'd never seen it. And I'm the kind of guy who wants to see it with my own two eyes. So I said, you know what? I'm going to book a trip. I'm going to see what it's like. And I'm going to go to the Philippines because mainly, if I go to the Philippines, I don't need to learn a language. My understanding at the time, and I found this to be true, is that in the Philippines, everybody speaks English. Thailand, you need to learn the language. Just wasn't something I was ready to do. I can tell you firsthand, everybody in the Philippines does speak English. Little known fact, but they teach their school in English in the Philippines, which is why everybody there speaks English. Because middle school, high school, you're speaking English the whole time you're there. So their English is excellent. You don't need any language skill whatsoever to travel the whole countryside. Now you can earn, bonus points if you learn some phrases in Cebuana or what's the other one? Basically, they've got language for Manila, Visayan, and then Cebuana. And if you learn those, and then there's Tagalog, well, you get some bonus points for that. But if you don't, it's really not that big a deal. Now, when I was there, when I was traveling to the Philippines, there were a couple of things to consider. The biggest cities were Manila and Cebu. And I was thinking of those primarily. There's also Davao, but nobody was talking about Davao. The big conversations were Manila and Cebu. There was a little bit of conversation around Angeles, but Angeles in the Philippines is kind of like the red light district in Amsterdam. If you're going to party, then yeah, that's probably great. If you're going for relationships, doesn't really sound like the right place to think about. So that wasn't what I was looking for. Separately, I started talking to a woman who I met online on a dating site called Pina Love. I'd say I started talking to her around January because I had this realization that I was going to the Philippines. And a big part of why I was going is I wanted to see if the women in the Philippines were really that different than the women here. But I'd never actually talked to a Filipina who was from the Philippines. Now, little known fact, I live right outside Manhattan. The part of New Jersey I'm in is maybe half a mile from lower Manhattan. And there are a lot of Filipinas who live in New York. There's kind of a little Manila section of the Bronx. So if you want to interact with Filipinas out here, you can, but they're Western. They've grown up here in a culture where the divorce rate's roughly 50%, where marriages are initiated by women, 70, 80, 90% of the time. They've grown up in a culture like us, a culture where marriage really has a lot of questions that need to be answered because there's a whole lot of risk and there can be a reward, but 50% of the time you don't really seem to achieve it. So stands to, it's a fair question. Why bother? I wanted to talk to a Filipina from the Philippines. I wanted to see what it was like to talk to someone who grew up in a culture where the divorce rate, 0. They don't really have divorce over there. Now, there's a Muslim section of the Philippines. I didn't really spend time there, and they've got different rules related to their religion. But in the Christian sections of the Philippines, which was the vast majority, this is a Catholic community, no, divorce doesn't exist. Divorce may be coming to the Philippines, but even if it does, it's not going to be no-fault divorce. So this is an area where people understand going in that when they get married, they're getting married for life. I wanted to know what relationships looked like, what women looked like in a culture that thought like that, because that's an experience I've never seen. And dating a woman who thinks like that, that's a resource I don't have access to. Women here aren't born into that kind of a world, neither the men. Looking through Manila and Cebu, I started to realize that Cebu was going to be the better place for me for what I wanted to do. The reason for that was, in my experience, pretty simple. When I looked at Manila, Manila was a big city that was going to feel very, very familiar to me if I went and spent my time there. There would be plenty of tourists. It wouldn't feel necessarily that different than being at home. Probably more expensive, easier to get around. I wasn't necessarily going to stand out. That was absolutely positively not why I wanted to go to the Philippines. I wanted to see what it was going to feel like to go someplace where things are different. I wanted to feel what it was like to stand out and see if I would stand out in a good way. I needed a new experience. I was traveling to get to a different kind of environment. And I got to tell you, it delivered, it hit it out of the park. We'll talk about that in a bit. But to give you a quick snapshot, I was in Cebu for about 2 weeks. I saw tens of thousands of people while I was there. And the whole time that I was there, the total number of Black people I saw was maybe 6. Total number of expats I saw, handful, maybe a dozen, far less than 30. Point of that is, you go to Cebu, you stand out. Why is that important? Well, when you stand out, you're suddenly exotic. You're suddenly interesting. And to go from a culture where you're just a regular old guy to a culture where you start to feel like you're a celebrity, that's mind-blowing. You're walking around and people are staring, people are chatting, women are looking, women are sending you signals to let you know that they're interested. That was an entirely different world, shifting from some place where you can feel kind of invisible, feel kind of like just another regular old person, to a culture where you stand out and you are the hot commodity there is vastly different. We're going to get into all of this. But part of what I'm trying to help you to understand is how much you can enjoy in your first 24 hours in the Philippines. You'll be blown away. And if you're trying to make the decision, should I go, shouldn't I go? I'm here to tell you, there's not much reason not to go. If you can afford the trip, if you can block the time, you're going to walk away with an experience that you would never have in the States. And depending upon what you're going for, you might find a resource there that you can't find in the States. So, yeah, I make no bones about the fact that I am strongly encouraging guys, get your passports, get over there, see it for yourself. If you're disappointed, let's have the conversation. But again, I have yet to hear anyone talk to me about being disappointed unless they went there looking for fun. Now, some things to note. I went to the Philippines and I already had someone who I was going there to meet. I met this woman named Lynn. We had been talking online for a long time. The timing just worked out because I told her that I was going to be in the Philippines. She had space in between some work assignments that she had, so she was going to be able to show me around. I wasn't there looking for a girlfriend, but being there, even with someone, I still noticed women who were looking at me. If I wasn't with Lynn for a moment because she was off shopping or I was doing something, I'd notice women checking me out, walking by me and smiling. They're not initiating, but they're giving me every signal to let me know that they want me to initiate. This was about as comfortable an environment as you could find. And for guys who, might be uncomfortable breaking the ice, let me tell you, all you've got to be able to do in the Philippines is say hi to a woman who looks you in the eyes, smiles, and comes walking right past you. That's about how strong their signals are. And that's what you've got to look forward to once you're there. Now, my first day there, I did a whirlwind tour. I wanted to hit the malls. I wanted to see a couple of sites. And yeah, I did all of that. But some of my best days there weren't the days where I was running around seeing all the sights. They were days where I just kind of sat back, rode on a bus, chit-chatted with Lynn, and ended up finally getting to a destination after kind of chatting about life and, the area for a few hours. And it was all pleasant and it was all relaxed. This wasn't an interview, which is what dating in the West can feel like. It's all quick, fast, in a hurry. I'm trying to figure out if you're a spouse or not. No, this wasn't any of that. This was just people talking, getting to know each other, relaxing, enjoying each other's company. Things that I really don't see that much when I'm here. Now, with all of that as sort of set up, let's just talk some practical stuff about traveling to the Philippines, because the Philippines has some pros and the Philippines has some cons. First thing I'm going to tell you really have to do is you got to get used to a different pace of life. America, we're pretty buttoned up, and things don't really run off the rails that much here. That's something that we can take for granted. If you're flying to the Philippines, you're going to land in Manila. If you're going to Cebu, you're going to have some sort of a layover. I'm going to strongly encourage you to make sure you land in Manila early in the morning. Don't book flights that have you landing in Manila late at night. I made that mistake. I kind of knew better, but I was in a hurry. Booked my flight last minute. This is not a place where things are designed to run like clockwork. This is a place where you get into an airport late because your flight was delayed. It's 8 o'clock at night. You're looking for a gate agent to help you understand how to get a connect. They'll tell you, look, the gate agents will be back tomorrow at 8 a.m. You're on your own. They'll kick you out of the airport if they can. Like, we don't feel like being bothered. We got to go home, see our families. It's not designed to run smoothly, and you will find yourself having to do a lot of work to do things there that are turnkey here. Part of what I learned was about asking people for directions. You really got to pay attention to how convicted someone is to the directions they're giving you. You ask them, hey, how do I get to the ticket agent? They'll tell you something. They might tell you to go down this block, take a left, and go into the second door on the right. That might not be anywhere near where the gate agents are. It's just them feeling the need to give you an answer. And that was something I wasn't used to. My first few hours there were frustrating because I was trying to get answers and I didn't really know how to get them. But I didn't really appreciate the Philippines culture. So I was an American and I was in a hurry. Things weren't happening as fast and as smoothly as I was looking for. I just had to kind of relax my shoulders a bit. So, you know what? Things are going to work out. I will figure this out. I'm going to be calm about it. That's an important aspect of enjoying your time in the Philippines. Because if you're always looking for things to run on time, always expecting things to be smooth, you're going to run into some disappointment. That's just not the culture there. It's not a bad thing, but it is something that you want to understand going in. Now, that said, I eventually got from Manila to Cebu. When I finally got myself all settled after flying for 24 hours, okay, I needed a little nap. I just needed to get a little bit of energy back. I met Lynn because she came. She wanted to, meet me when I was there. And we started a journey. I wanted to go to the malls, wanted to see them. I heard about Ayala Mall. And let me tell you, if it's your first, let me sort of pause for this. If you go to Cebu and you've never been to the Philippines and you don't know anybody who's there, go to the mall. We kind of forget what it's like. Maybe some people who are younger don't know what it's like. But once upon a time in America, the mall was like the cool hangout. You could go to the mall, shop. People were there shopping. I was a young guy in high school. The girls would be there. Me and my buddies would go hang out. You could just talk to girls. That was where you went to kind of randomly meet people, and it worked. Malls don't really exist in America anymore. Sure, there are a couple of malls, but who really goes to them? You're going to shop on Amazon Prime. You're going to go someplace where you can go in and out. You don't just linger in the malls in America. But there is a bit more of that mall culture in the Philippines. If I was single and I just wanted to figure out what to do, yeah, I would spend my day at the mall. I'd go to the food court, get a snack. I'd shop for some shoes or a shirt. It's going to be cheap, maybe $4 or $5. I would spend my time literally asking people for directions to things just to trigger conversations. One of the things to note, especially, this works for all expats, but it especially works for you if you're Black, because you really stand out when you're in a mall with thousands of people and you are the only Black person in the whole mall. People are going to stare. They just don't see Black folks that much. And you're going to find yourself interacting with people who you normally wouldn't even think about. I mean, as a true story, I'm a pretty conservative guy in terms of the types of people who I like. I'm not into goths or freaks or any of that stuff. Somebody wants to have purple hair and 15 piercings in their face. That's on them. I don't really care, but that's just not what I normally go for. I won't forget, I was in Ayala Mall, my first day there. And I'm just walking past this woman who had on this outfit. Now she was, I guess, a goth, but she had the weirdest outfit on I'd ever seen. It was all black, like these 6-inch high platform heels with leggings that came up like just past her knee. She had on this sort of dress that was a skirt, tight, black, ruffles, made kind of out of leather with these elbow length gloves. She looked like somebody in a cartoon. I mean, if they did a live action version of a cartoon, she was already dressed and ready to just hop on set and participate. It was the most elaborate outfit I've ever seen a goth wear. It kind of caught my attention because it looked great for that kind of an outfit. And I wasn't looking at her, I was looking at the outfit. But she saw me and assumed that I was looking at her. She kind of sent me some signals. Now, I would guess she was maybe around 20. That's not what I normally go for. I'll admit, though, that there was a moment where I sort of thought, she is kind of interesting. I'm here with someone, and this is not my normal thing. But if I wanted to know what was going on, well, here it is. This is an experience I've never had, I would never expect to have in the States. But out here in the Philippines, well, it's a different world with different rules. And one of the things you have to decide as a man is, what do I want? Not what can I get, what's available, what makes sense. No, no, no. What do you want? Do you want a 19-year-old wife? Do you want a 35-year-old wife? Are you cool having, a woman who has kids? Do you want 5 kids of your own? What do you want? That's a question you really need to ask yourself in the Philippines, because you can find yourself wasting time because you're dating over there the way you're dating over here. You kind of find someone, you try to figure out if it can work. And, when it eventually doesn't, well, you move on. No, no, no. Over there, let's get to it. What do you have? Does it align with what I want? If so, we can proceed. If not, well, I'm going to move on and do my own thing. It really works that way in the Philippines because over there, women are competing for men. Now, I was on a live stream. This was maybe 2 weeks ago. And I was talking to the guys there. I took the time to actually dial in because there was a big debate that these guys were having about the Philippines. And none of the guys on the live stream had been to the Philippines. So it was sort of a silly conversation to me because it was clear that none of them had been and none of them really understood it. I hop on just to be quick and just to share some perspective. And I finally said to the guys, because they were arguing about the caliber of women that were available to you in the Philippines, them fundamentally saying you're only going to get women over there who are in poverty, which is not true. So this was the explanation I gave them that helped them to understand it. When I was there for 2 weeks, saw tens of thousands of people, as I mentioned. Only a couple of Black people, as I mentioned. There are Filipinas who specifically like Black men, specifically like white men, specifically like Filipino men. You have a niche when you go there. So there will be thousands of women who specifically are interested in you. If they like Black guys, you're it. They don't have an army of Black guys to choose from. You are elevated in your status when you're over there. It's a cheat code. Not everybody believes in that, but having been there, yeah, it's a cheat code. You really don't have to put in a lot of effort to find exactly what you want when you're there. Doesn't work the same way here. It can be hard to process if you've never seen it, but let me tell you, it's waiting for you over there, and all you've got to do is get your plane ticket. Now, that said, I was in Ayala Mall because that mall was the one I'd heard of. It was popular, and it didn't fail to, it delivered. I wasn't disappointed. But what did shock me was that Ayala Mall was kind of a higher end mall. It's an expensive mall, so it attracts a certain kind of person. There's another mall in Cebu City called SM City Mall. That's the regular mall. That's more equivalent to, like, I guess maybe like Target or Walmart. Just regular people are there. That mall is far more crowded with far, far more people who are just regular Philippines people. You want to see what it's like to experience the Philippines? Go to SM City. It's packed. Stacks and stacks of people. It's like you took Manhattan's Times Square and you crammed it all into a mall. It gets that packed. And people are looking around because you stand out. So suddenly you are a celebrity. You'll hear people talk about, women being women wherever you go in the world. And for the most part, I think that's true. I do think that women are generally looking for guys who are tall, successful, and attractive. But when you're in the Philippines, you are tall, successful, and attractive. People don't understand exactly how much they benefit from that over there. The average height in America for a guy is about 5'9". The average height of a guy in the Philippines is about 5'4". Suddenly, you're a giant. I'm 5'11", not quite 6 feet tall, but I'm close. In America, I'm nothing special. I was like an NBA player when I was in the Philippines. There were a couple of people taller than me, but no, most of the places I went, I towered over everyone. Black guy from America, I'm exotic. People were looking. People were curious. I went into a food court at night. We'll talk about that. There was a guy doing karaoke. There are a couple of hundred people there. But when the black guy comes walking in, the guy stopped and started playing Stevie Wonder. He wanted me to know that he knew. I gave him the thumbs up. He felt rewarded because, hey, there's a black guy here, and he saw me. He knows that I know his music. I like this. That's the kind of treatment you get when you're there because you're different. And the women appreciate that. The women will show you that they're curious, that they're interested. All you got to do is be willing to say hi or ask them for some directions. Can you tell me where the food court is? Can you tell me where I can go buy some shoes? It's that simple. It's literally that simple. And I want guys to understand that if you go and you see it, it's going to blow your mind. Now, that said, to give you more details on just what it was like in the Philippines, I was in Cebu City, and I stayed in this hotel. It was called a Holiday Inn Spa. Now, it's not a 5-star. I didn't want a 5-star. I just wanted something basic. This was a nice, clean room, high-speed Wi-Fi, swimming pool. They had a little cafe that I didn't use. It was nothing special. But there was a great coffee shop right at the end of the block and kind of a food court area also at the end of the block. I spent like $21 a night, and I didn't get a extended rate. This was just their regular nightly rate. Pool, nice room, right in the middle of Cebu City, $21 a night. Probably could have got cheaper. I just didn't really try to get a discount. When you're staying there, you can hop on a Grab. That's their version of the taxi. Get pretty much anywhere you want to go in not that much time, and your Grab is typically going to cost you about $4, maybe less. You will start to get really accustomed to the prices in the Philippines. So when you get that occasional $5 Grab, you'll actually be mad because you'll feel like you're getting cheated. But then you take a step back and you realize, okay, I just spent $5 on a cab ride. Really not that big a deal. I just had to adjust to kind of the culture. When you're in the Philippines, your nights, Sugbo Mercado, which basically means Cebu Market, that's going to be the place to go if you haven't met anybody. Again, you're going to get out there. There's a karaoke stage, it's a food area. There's this huge sort of park that surrounds it. People are just casually walking by. You get yourself some food, you sit at a bench because it's all bench style seating, which means you're sitting around people who are going to be more likely to talk to you. They just talk casually. While you're waiting in line to get your food, you'll be talking casually to people. You can spend $5, get a really great meal, get yourself a beer, enjoy the music, and talk to people. I can't stress enough how easy it's going to be to talk to people. We don't really do that in America. In America, we're independent. I go to my coffee shop, I get my coffee, I go sit down and I get to work. I don't really interact with anybody other than the cashier for a couple of minutes where we maybe kind of, pretend like we're friends while we're completing our transaction and then we go. You are isolated despite being surrounded by people in the States. In the States, we tend to have our own places. I get my own place. I spend my time in my house watching my TV, watching Netflix and football games. I'm independent. That's just life here. That's not life in the Philippines. In the Philippines, people live with their families. They've got a communal style of living. You'll meet women who are 26. They still live at home because they're not married and they're not moving out of their house and their family until they're married and are going to go start their own family. That's normal there. It's also part of the reason why you as an American or you as a Westerner are generally going to stand out. Part of what I found about why some Filipinos aren't as excited about guys from the Philippines as guys from the West is that we seem more mature. Guys from the Philippines, are part of the culture. They're living with their parents till they get married. Some Westerner moves out there, gets his own place. He's a guy who looks like he's stable. He's a guy who looks like he's already ready for a relationship. And for the most part, what I've found is that a lot of the Westerners who are moving out there are moving out there for exactly that. I've seen tons and tons of guys at this point, and I've only really been in this space for a few months, but just through the TikToks and the social media that I've been following, there are tons and tons of guys who go to the Philippines and they very quickly find women who treat them better than they ever imagined was possible. These are guys who are going over there with low expectations. They kind of feel like they've been beaten down by the culture in the West, and they're just tired. They just want to find, a place where they can relax and someone who they can kind of enjoy. And then they get there. And then they get treated like royalty by the community because they're tall and rich and interesting. And then they get treated like heads of household by their girlfriends because that's their culture. And of course, they're looking for a guy who's a provider. And of course, they're willing to make a trade where the man is handling the financial aspects of their life and the woman is handling the domestic aspects of their life. That's just their culture. And it's not even about them having providers who let them be housewives, because you'll find Filipinas who marry Westerners and still work and still contribute economically to the household. Culturally, they like their men. They like their husbands. They like spending time with guys. You go there and it's a different experience. You don't have kind of the feminist finger pointing at you and talking about toxic masculinity or any of that nonsense. No. Women are women, men are men, and they seem to be able to get along. So you just need to find what you want and find a way to fit in. Now, with all of that said, let me talk about one of my favorite experiences in the Philippines. And you see it in my background. But I want to build sort of the story of what was going on. There's a lot to do in the Philippines. I mean, more than, there's a lot to do in Cebu. I didn't do everything I had on my list. There was just too much. I couldn't keep track. But I knew I wanted to go check out some waterfalls. I knew I wanted to go check out some specific locations. And I'd heard about this whale shark diving experience that I wasn't 100% sure of. Now, I know how to swim, so I was okay with that. And I did some research on whale sharks, so I knew that they weren't going to try to eat me. That's not really the way they're designed. I also knew that there had been no experiences, there had been no fatalities, no serious injuries in the whale shark dives that had happened. I was going to do my research. I wasn't just going to go diving into the water with some wild animals. But it was still a different kind of experience. This is still a shark, and I'm still out in the open ocean. And if something goes sideways, well, I'm going to be lunch. So that was in the back of my mind. However, here's the thing that was also in the back of my mind. I've flown halfway around the world to spend time in a country that's different than any country I've been in, to spend time in a country where I'm different than most of the people who they see on a given day. I'm not going to have a lot of opportunities to whale shark dive in my regular life. This might be the one chance I get to do it. So, do I want to do it? Or do I want to back out? For me, I decided, I feel game. I'm going to give it a shot. And it was odd because when you're standing in line, let me tell you, one of the weirdest things I've seen was people in boats, dorsal fins in the ocean, and people diving into the water with those dorsal fins. To see that in person just doesn't look right. It's like you're asking animals to eat you is what gets triggered. But I have to admit, I saw tons of people coming back from those boat trips, huge smiles, excitement, talking about the experience. And I thought, I'm not seeing people who are relieved that it's over. I'm seeing people who are excited about having the experience. I'm getting more and more excited about this. This is something that I want to do. I swam with whale sharks for 30 minutes. It felt like 3 minutes. I couldn't believe it was over so fast. I would have done it again, but there were so many people there that the wait was 2 hours, and I just wasn't going to wait 2 hours for another half-hour whale shark dive. There are waterfalls that are picturesque. There are hills that look like nothing else on earth. They're whale sharks. There are experiences you're going to have that you will carry with you for the rest of your life. Just these moments where you tried something new, where you tried something that was exciting, where you can share these stories with your friends. You can recount these stories. I'll be an old man and I'll still be talking about that time I went whale shark diving in the Philippines. That's something that was worth the expense. And the whole dive was maybe $20. So, yeah, there's tons to do in the Philippines from an experiences standpoint. But we won't pretend like the relationships and the women you can meet there aren't an important component. Now, the one other thing that I want to talk about tonight, and then if there's any questions, we'll open up for those. But I do want to talk about one of the downsides of the Philippines because it's something that I wasn't looking into when I was there. For those, I had met someone who I really liked, but it didn't work out through no fault of either of us. It was just the nature of the Philippines. In the Philippines, there's a phenomenal life. But if you come back to the States, things can be very challenging if you meet someone who you like, because there is no easy way to bring a Filipina back to the States. You're basically looking at a couple of scenarios. Scenario is if that Filipina already has travel history, they've already got a visa that's been stamped, likely because they've been working offshore in Korea or Japan. Okay, they've got travel experience. It's a little bit easier for them to travel. The fastest way for you to bring a Filipina to the States is if you're going to do what's called the 90-day fiance K1 visa. Now, I've heard guys do it, but I don't recommend it. It's going to take a year and a half for you to bring your Filipina to the States if you go that route. That's about as fast as you can possibly do it. And you need to understand what you're doing, because you're taking someone who only knows life in the Philippines, whose entire family is in the Philippines. You're bringing them to the States, and they have 90 days to figure out whether they are comfortable building a whole life with you here. That's a very big ask. I don't know that I could date someone for 90 days and know if they're the one or not. To decide, are you the one? And is this country the place where I want to be? And am I going to be comfortable not being able to see the family that I've spent all of my life with? I mean, every single day of my life has been spent with my family. And I'm giving all of that up for someone who I've known for 90 days. Are there any cautions about the Filipinas? We'll come to that one in just a second. That's a good question. I don't recommend a K1 visa, but that's me, and some people may have their own thoughts on the risks they're willing to take. Now, the one thing I will say about this is that I looked into the divorce rates because I wanted to know, if you bring a Filipina to the States, what happens, since now she can get divorced. What was interesting to me was you're still better off if you marry a Filipina than if you marry someone in the West. The divorce rate in the States is roughly 50% for two Americans. When you look at guys who marry Filipinas, that divorce rate is only 30%. So those marriages tend to work. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they've grown up in a culture where divorce isn't an option. But also, to some extent, they've decided to invest in you and move here with you. So when you look at everything they've given up to come here to be with you, that's not something that they're going to give up very lightly. Now, the other option is to do a B1, B2, which is more of a travel visa. That gives them more time. They can spend basically half a year in the States. Plenty of time for them to start getting comfortable being in the States, figuring out whether they like it or not before they potentially go back. Not a bad option at all, but that takes even longer than the K1. So if a K1 is a year and a half, a B1, B2 might be 2 years, might be longer. Essentially, you meet a Filipina, and if you're coming back to the States, it's not going to be easy to bring them back, even though you've built a great relationship. What I found with Lynn was Lynn didn't really want to live in America. So, contrary to what a lot of people say about women in the Philippines just wanting to get green cards, what I've seen, that's not really true. Filipinas are excited about having someone who's moving to the Philippines because they get to stay with their family. They get to stay near their family. Americans are no different. We generally like to be connected to our families. If you're moving to the Philippines, you're gold. If you're coming back, well, then you have to figure out how to make that work. And that can be a challenge. Now, Omen7 asked the question, are there any cautions about the Filipinas? I'll say yes and no. But let's talk about this caution and whether it's something you care about or not. Now, I'm going to assume for this that you've moved to the Philippines, you found your Filipina, and you're trying to build a life with her. Here's the Filipina scam, and there's a podcaster called Sunshine Shoulders who regularly streams. He lives there. He's, I believe, 60. He has a Filipina wife who's about 40. They have a child. They've built a life. This is the one that he actually talked about in his stream as one of the big ones. In the Philippines, age gap dating is a reality. Age doesn't really matter over there. You can be 60, you can marry someone who's 20. That's not uncommon. Not only is it not uncommon, it's not even difficult. There were 18-year-old girls who were flirting with me. That's too young for me personally, but for some guys, they're saying, hey, you know what? This is exactly what I want. They would have been fine with that. But here's how the scam works. There are some Filipinas who are looking for older Western guys to marry. Their thought is, I'm going to marry you. I'm going to take care of you for as long as you live, which I'm assuming isn't going to be that long, 10 years, 15 years. And when you die, I'm assuming that I'm going to have a nice little chunk of change at the end of this because I'm going to be in your will. There's going to be something for me. Great. That's what I'm going to use to go into phase 2 of my life. They are with you not because they love you. They are with you because they are looking for payday. But when you think about what it really means to you, let's take a hypothetical. Let's say you're a 70-year-old guy, you marry a 25-year-old hottie, and she's actually a fantastic wife for the 15 years that you're alive. You die, she takes her money and she goes off and dates somebody else. Yeah, she was just doing a tour of duty, but as far as you were concerned, you spent your last few years with a loyal, caring woman who basically treated you like a king. Some people will say that they can't deal with that. It has to be true love. And if that's who you are, well, okay, that's who you are. That's not me. I'm coming from a very different world where, let's face it, I think people in America say that they're trying to look for love, but for the most part, with a 50% divorce rate, love doesn't really seem to be working. It's also interesting to point out that in America, this whole notion of dating around and trying to find the right person, that's the way we move. But people forget that dating is kind of a new thing. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, they didn't really date. When my grandfather was, in my grandfather's time, basically guys married women because that's who they wanted to have sex with. So you'd run to the courthouse, you'd tie the knot, and okay. The notion of dating around and experimenting with lots of different people to figure out what you liked, that didn't happen. That's a new idea. When you look at the Philippines, dating, no, they're not really trying to date a lot. You can find Filipinas who are 28 years old who've had 2 or 3 boyfriends in their whole life because they're not looking to shop around. Now, that said, Angeles is different. Angeles is more like the red light district. You go there, I think there are a lot of working girls in Angeles, so, buyer beware. If that's what you're into, that's what you're going to find. Manila seems to be transitioning. When I look at the young women who are in Manila, they're starting to parrot a lot of Western talking points. You got women in Manila who are young and are starting to say that they're 10s when you ask them how they're rated. when you look at the women in, and so with all of that, basically all the feminist talking points, all of the aggravation that comes along with that, yeah, I would expect to see out of younger women in Manila. But in Cebu, older women, and I mean by older, I'm talking about women who are like 26. No, these are young, thin, long-haired women who think they look like threes and fours, because over there, all the women are young, thin, long hair, dark skin. They're common. Women who we would consider to be beautiful feel like, sloppy Joe sandwiches over there. I think that what you have in terms of the watchouts is more something to be aware of. Because I get the sense that in the Philippines, women feel like, to some extent, the lottery is kind of blowing into town. For us, you can go to the Philippines and find the quote unquote country girl. If you think about in the West, how you used to look at the South and some of the women in the South as being kind of traditional, maybe a little bit naive, but also, more modest. Basically, the types of wives you would look for, once upon a time, that was the thought. That's what's available in the Philippines. Country girls. You drive an hour out of Cebu City, you can find women who basically have kind of grown up on farms. And these women are amazed that, rich Americans are coming to their town and are interested in them and are willing to make them wives and mothers. If you got a problem with that, I get it. And it's kind of funny. I was actually on a date earlier today with a woman who I had a conversation around this with. Just kind of came up organically. Her comments were basically that women in the Philippines might be looking at guys and finding them interesting because they make a lot more money than these Filipinos do. So it's not really the guy they're interested in, it's the money. And we didn't get into the conversation in as much depth as we'd like, but my point was that's what the West is. If you hear the conversations about hypergamy, when you hear women in the West, what do they lead with? Money. They're looking for guys who make a lot of money. There's really no difference here versus there, except that over there, a guy who makes a lot of money doesn't have to make nearly as much as they do here to qualify. If you're making $30,000 a year in the Philippines, you're kind of rich. That's not middle class. That's not really upper middle class. That's kind of high class. And that's fairly common in the States. Now, not everybody has a job that they can do remotely, but if you do, well, you can find a flight deal to the Philippines. And let's face it, I was in a hotel that, with no discounts, was going to run me, $600 a month? If I wanted a long-term deal, I could probably have gotten that hotel for $450, $500 a month. And that was a nice hotel. That was equivalent to a studio apartment, except I had a pool and, I'd have to take my laundry out, but you can have a phenomenal life in the Philippines for far less than you would imagine possible in the States. You can experience what it's like to be a celebrity. Sure, the women there are going to be, to some extent with you because you are so different. I've heard Filipinas talk about how Westerners are viewed as celebrities, and it's a flex for a Filipina to be able to tell her friends that she's dating an expat. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't have a problem with that. If they feel like I'm special simply because I'm from the West, great. Are you pretty? Are you fun? Are you kind? I don't really care. I'm going to have a good life, and I'm not going to overthink why I was so lucky. That's kind of, that's the moral of what I wanted to to cover for tonight's show. I'll keep the line open just in case there are any other questions, because I was happy to hear people talking about wanting to go to the Philippines. And if you've got questions about things, I do want to answer those so that you can feel more comfortable about the decision. You can feel more confident making the decision. It's not, you might be spending $1,500 on a plane ticket. You might be stuck in an airport for 36 hours if you have some flight delays. Those aren't small considerations to make. But if you know that once you get there, your mind is going to be blown, it's a little bit easier to make the leap and give it a shot. Okay. So what I'll say is, if other questions come up, just drop something in the chat. Send me a line. I've got lots of videos on the Philippines, lots of footage. It'll help you to think about different things you might want to explore. Also potentially help you think about how you might want to tackle some things. Some things I did well, some things I had to learn how to do better. But one thing I can definitely say is I'll be back. Last Good Man in Jersey signing out. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Look forward to talking to you with the next show.